Right, good afternoon. Hello, welcome, and as always, happy Pride Month to this week's Student Bites, your weekly source of insights into being LGBT+ in business and graduate recruitment. My name is George Wright, and I'm the Student Engagement Lead here at MyGWork. I am responsible for why the presentation isn't working for anyone beyond me. That's terribly fun. Oh, I have to scroll down. There we go. Sorry about this. Yes, I am responsible for student outreach and graduate opportunities. If you've got a question, want to talk, or just want to find out more about what we do, please do not hesitate to drop me an email. This week, we're joined by the law firm HERBERT SMITH FREEHILLS. HERBERT SMITH FREEHILLS are a partner of MyGWork, and their job posting, events, and company page can be found over on our network at MyGWork. But before we get into our panel, let's take a look at this week's news. We start with the news this week that Switzerland is considering legalising same-sex marriage, making it the 30th country in the world to do so. Despite a historically progressive approach to homosexuality, with the country being among the first to decriminalise it when it did so in 1940, same-sex couples are still only entitled currently in law to civil partnerships rather than marriages. The reason behind this has been largely attributed to the largest political party in the country's National Council, the lower house of Parliament, opposing marriage equality. But it must be considered that they do not have a majority within the chamber and that a broad coalition of progressive movements could vote through the procedure. With it now being raised recently in the National Council, many political experts in the country believe that same-sex marriage will pass, considering polling showing up to 80% of Swiss citizens support it, as well as institutions like the Swiss Reformed Church. In the USA, 4 Democratic representatives have proposed legislation to end the deferral periods for queer men who wish to donate blood. Proposed by Representatives Adam Schiff, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Barbara Lee, and Caroline Maloney, the resolution would abolish discrimination against LGBT+ men through the use of scientific criteria for individual risk assessments when deciding whether or not someone is eligible to donate. Earlier this year, the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, reduced the deferral period, which requires men who have sex with men to remain celibate to donate, from 1 year to 3 months. This still drew ire from many, including some in long-term monogamous relationships that pointed out that in order to donate, they would have to abstain, despite neither partner being any more at risk of sharing contaminated blood than a heterosexual couple in the same situation. We look forward with hope to the results and progress that this resolution looks to achieve. A new study by GLAAD, in collaboration with Procter & Gamble, has revealed that LGBT+ inclusion in adverts promotes acceptance and has a positive impact for brands. The study, carried out in the US, asked non-LGBT+ audiences how they felt about seeing LGBT+ characters in advertising and series, and 68% responded that it made them feel better about buying products from companies that do so. 86% of the respondents stated that the inclusion of LGBT+ individuals in their marketing reflected the company's support of LGBT rights. 85% stated that the LGBT inclusion shows the company commitment to offering products to all types of consumers. 82% agreed that LGBT inclusion reflects on the company's value for diversity, and 80% stated that LGBT inclusion in their marketing shows that the company sees the importance of including LGBT people. With Pride Month now here, we can expect to see many brands adopting LGBT+ branding and promoting LGBT+ networks. And this in turn will lead to the important question of who is not participating. GLAAD CEO, Sarah Kate Ellis, says this has created a time for marketers to really step up. A big first in Vietnam this week, as the country's first trans dad and his wife, who is also trans, became parents to a healthy baby girl. Minh Cang is the first trans man in Vietnam to have been pregnant and give birth, after he stopped taking hormones for 3 months. The couple have celebrity status in Vietnam, having appeared on and met via a televised trans beauty contest. Earlier in the year, the couple appeared on Come Out to the Light, a popular Vietnamese TV show, where they called for the public to support couples like them to realise their dream of being parents. and health centres to help in providing the necessary care. In time, Vietnam will hopefully see more trans parents, like Australia, who has seen over 228 trans men give birth in the last decade. And finally, former X Factor contestant and YouTube star Trevi Moran has come out as a trans woman. In an emotional video posted to YouTube, 21-year-old Moran revealed that she is 2 months in on hormones, having begun to question her identity as a cisgender male in 2017. She also revealed she has been documenting her transition and plans to release it as part of a docuseries called Trevi, The Transition. Hi, my name is Trevi Moran. I'm a transgender female. It's a good start, and I can't believe I just said that out loud, Moran began the video with, which went on to talk about her journey from coming out as gay in 2015, through to questioning her identity, fighting her demons, and coming out on top to transition to be who she truly was. For those uninitiated, Student Bites is a weekly webinar where we talk to different inclusive companies and their staff to learn about what it's like to be LGBT+ in the workplace, and how you can get there if that's where you want to be. If you have a question, feel free to type it in the chat or the Q&A section, and we'll come to the end for our panel members to discuss. This week, we're joined by Herbert Smith Freehills. Joining me, we have Steve Conyers and Rebecca Worrall. After studying history of art at university and a brief spell working in the art market in London, Steve converted to law in 2012 and joined Herbert Smith Freehills in 2015. He now chairs the company's IRIS network in London. IRIS, that's Inclusion, Respecting Identity and Sexuality, is the firm's global LGBTQ+ and ally network, which supports LGBTQ+ inclusion within the firm and amongst its clients. Aside from his work with the IRIS network, he is an associate in the firm's restructuring and insolvency practice, helping clients with all aspects of financial distress. Rebecca studied psychology at Leeds University and moved to London after graduation to complete an HR graduate scheme. Getting her first taste of graduate recruitment and law when she joined a smaller firm in 2017, Rebecca is now involved in the graduate recruitment team at Herbert Smith Freehills. Her role primarily involves leading on the firm's university strategies, creating marketing materials, such as the brochure, website, and freebies, and hosting all of Herbert Smith Freehills on-campus and in-house student events. So I would like to welcome our team. Let's unmute them now, bring them in. Ooh. Hello there, we should hopefully be seeing more. Let's get the videos going, gang. How are we? Can I start, if we may? I don't know if one of you particularly wants to take this. Just tell us a little bit more about who Herbert Smith Freehills are and sort of the work they do. I don't know, perhaps if...
Steve, if you want to go first.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to. So hi everyone, my name's Steve. My pronouns are he, him. And as George introduced me, I have a sort of background in the art world and then decided that law was going to be a lot more fun. We are Herbert Smith Freehills is a global law firm. I work in the London office. We are a very general sort of large corporate law firm dealing with all sort of aspects of particularly cross-border work, corporate disputes, finance, all the sort of usual stuff that you would get from a top city law firm. Particularly from my side, diversity and inclusion is a really key value to the firm. It's what enticed me to join the firm. And that's one of the things that we can talk about today. Rebecca, who, as George said, is sort of in our grad recruitment team, probably has the more official spiel about the kind of work that HSF does, but at least that's my view on it.
Absolutely. So yeah, so Rebecca, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that at all.
I think you summed it up nicely there, Steve. But yeah, I guess just to kind of introduce myself, yeah, I'm Rebecca. I work in the graduate recruitment team. So I work in a team of 5, so quite a big team really. And a really lovely team to work in. And we're responsible for recruiting around 60 trainees each year to join in 2 separate cohorts. I'm sure you are familiar. For those that aren't, we recruit 2 years in advance. So you need to finish your degree and then complete law school as well, which is why we kind of recruit those 2 years in advance, which I think is quite unique as a profession. But yeah, in terms of what Herbert Smith Freehills does, I think Steve has kind of summed it up nicely. We're international. We have 26 offices globally. I think that was the latest number. And I think it was in 2012 we merged with a huge Australian firm, which kind of gave us the Freehills. So we're pretty big, yeah, I mean, I'm here today to kind of answer graduate recruitment related questions or anything that you have on kind of the application process, really.
Fantastic. So you both we touched on it a little bit within your bios, but I just wondered if you'd be able to tell us a little bit more about sort of how you got into your current career at Herbert Smith Freehills and sort of what made you want to apply there. I don't know, Steve, if you wanted to start on that from the legal sort of perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, I kind of came to law through a slightly windy route. I knew I always wanted a job that was intellectually quite stimulating and quite challenging. I was at university doing a subject that I absolutely loved and was passionate about, history of art, still am. I worked in the art market for a little bit and then thought actually this wasn't quite enough. I wanted something where there was more of a sort of client need rather than just trading in pieces of art. There was something that a sense of actually helping people out, and that might sound slightly odd when you're talking about big corporates, but there is a sense in our kind of day-to-day work that there are people who actually rely on our advice, and what we do ultimately helps grow the economy and create jobs, or I'm particularly working in restructuring and insolvency, so a lot of what we do is helping preserve jobs. I didn't train at Herbert Smith Freehills. I trained at a smaller firm before moving over when I was about 6 months qualified. The reason I moved to Herbert Smith was firstly because while a smaller firm environment can be good, you don't get that access to the really big deals, the big kind of exciting stuff that you see on the front pages of newspapers. I'd go home and talk to my parents about what I was doing, and they were like, what are you talking about? Whereas now I can talk to them and they can relate, and they'd be like, oh wow, you're doing that, that's quite cool. There's also a huge sort of cross-border element to what we do, so we're always having exciting phone calls with this morning it was an 8 a.m. phone call with a Japanese client, and then probably tonight it'll be a phone call with some folks over in LA who are arguing about some film licenses. So there's a huge amount of variety within law, and particularly within HSF. Obviously, there's the HSF has been known for a very, very long time as being a diverse and inclusive employer. It's wonderful to say now that our new senior partner, Justin D'Agostino, is an out gay man, which is wonderful for the firm to be able to say that. I think we are the only law firm at the moment who has a gay man sitting right at the top, which is brilliant and really helps to certainly helps me as the chair of a network to drive the agenda through and make sure that we are constantly making changes both internally and with our clients to create a diverse and inclusive atmosphere. So that's my background and how I ended up here.
Fantastic. And Rebecca, from an HR perspective, so we mentioned you worked at a slightly smaller firm, but what for you was your sort of route into Herbert Smith Freehills? Yeah,
so I did work at a much smaller firm, and I had it in my mind that when I was looking at elsewhere, and my next career move, I wanted to work at a bigger firm. I think a bigger firm gives you more opportunities to develop and grow just by virtue of its size, but also from a graduate recruitment HR perspective, you're given a lot more responsibility because you have lots of big exciting projects to work on, and that's what kind of attracted me to a bigger firm. In terms of Herbert Smith Freehills, I really wanted to work somewhere where for a long time. So I was thinking for the long term, this wasn't just going to be a career hop for me. So I invested a lot of time and research into the culture, and now I appreciate that's really difficult to find detail on or to fully understand from reading a website or a brochure or those kind of things. Which is why I actually think, if you guys come on a vacation scheme for 2 to 3 weeks, that's an invaluable opportunity for you to really get into the skin of the firm and really understand the culture of the firm. So I had 2 one-hour interviews to kind of determine whether the firm was the right one for me, and I only needed 1 interview. I only needed the first 30 minutes, and I think once you know, and I just thought, even if I don't get this job, I've had a really positive experience, and luckily they liked me, and luckily I've been here for a year and a half now, and I absolutely love it. I think it's really kind of affirmed all my assumptions that I had made, and that's a really nice feeling. So yeah, definitely the culture that kind of attracted me. Diversity, inclusion is really at the heart of what we do, and I felt that as soon as 30 minutes into a 1-hour interview, really.
Fantastic. So, I mean, again, I know with the current climate, it's perhaps a bit of a silly question, but thinking more before the coronavirus pandemic, is it possible to just sort of examine what what your office life would have been like? What sort of you would have been, getting to work in the morning? What you're sort of looking at, Steve? If that's we start with you on that one.
Yeah, one of the wonderful ways in which HSF is more progressive, certainly than my previous firm, and some other firms, is that they're very flexible about sort of working arrangements, and associates are all encouraged to work from home. I mean, now all the time, but pre-coronavirus, it was at least 1 day a week. So there isn't. It's hard to give a kind of a typical day in the life, because there are some people like me who are early birds. I like to get up early. I go to the gym, which is immediately below the office, have a good workout first thing, and then head in for about sort of 8:30, start my work while it's a little bit quieter before the emails start. And every single day is different, and I think that's true whatever practice area you go into. Some days you will be rushing off to court to make an urgent application that you've only had the papers for about 20 minutes beforehand. Sometimes you are sitting doing a piece of research and going to the firm's library, getting the books out, going onto all the online resources. Then maybe grabbing a bite of lunch. I won't pretend that we managed to get downstairs to the canteen for lunch for a full hour every day. It's a city law firm, but we do manage to kind of see each other quite a lot. And then there's quite a lot of sort of evening things that go on, both internal events, not just the Iris network hosted events, but kind of general sports and social committee, things like that, or client events, and associates and trainees throughout the firm are encouraged to join kind of client events, be they talks or panel events or drinks or something like that. But honestly, it can change on a daily basis, and it's one of the things that gets me up in the morning.
Fantastic. And Rebecca, sort of on on the more HR side of things, what are you looking at?
Yeah, I mean, my work in graduate recruitment is very seasonal, so it kind of is follows the same format every year. So I guess the highlights: marking applications. We get about 3,500 applications a year that we mark by hand, by a human being, and so we split those between the graduate recruitment team. So that fills a lot of my time during kind of September through to January, really. I do a lot of hopefully on-campus activities. I'm dying to get out there and meet lots of people, but usually I'm away from my desk quite a lot, at universities, hosting open days at the firm, running assessment centres. It's kind of the best part of my job, really, is not being at my desk. And then I guess the other side of that is really kind of deciding the strategies on how to attract the best talent from each of our, target universities. So thinking about what we can do to make them apply to us and see us as an employer of choice. So that involves kind of some strategic thinking. So it's an exciting job. I'd probably say I've got the most fun job at the firm, actually.
Fantastic. if we could sort of carry straight on, I know Steve, sort of you mentioned about Iris there, and you're quite heavily involved in the running of that. So I just wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about sort of the work Iris does, sort of what role that has in the firm, how, for example, how staff could join it, etc.
Yeah, sure. So it's we have, I'm going to get this wrong, but I think we have 6 staff employee resource groups or networks. So there's a multiculturalism network, an ability network, and various others. And the Iris is the network for LGBTQ plus colleagues and allies. I sort of help run the London aspect of it, but it's really important to remember that we are a global firm and Iris works globally, and that's one of our biggest strengths. We help to, I suppose we sort of have three main limbs from the work we do in London. The first is the sort of general, more social side events, things like that, that happen internally within the firm. So that can be anything from some drinks after work to a long read or a book club, which fortunately book clubs and things work quite well remotely. Film screenings, just get-togethers, things like that, which can be really, really important, particularly when you're starting in a new firm. Being part of a network is a fantastic way to build support and to get to know people in different departments. That's the sort of social side. The next side is what I think of as the policy side. That's where we're actually a little bit more hard-nosed, and we sort of lobby internally to make sure that we as a firm are living up to our values and really representing internally. So that's things like chasing people in HR about making sure that our policies are the best they possibly can be when it comes to recruiting talent. 2 years ago, we rolled out a trans inclusion policy that gave managers kind of guidance and information on how if people were to transition, how we as a firm would deal with that within our existing firm guidelines, and even to the level. The current project that I've got on at the moment is to try and make sure that that there is a little pot of money to pay for new work outfits for those people who do need some kind of affirmation, and that they are suddenly not having to go and buy a whole new wardrobe. Things like that. And then there's the external side of Iris, and that's about engaging with our clients. It ties back to the global side of things that I mentioned. We are hugely fortunate in the position that we are in, having our major offices being in the UK and in Australia, which are both pretty friendly jurisdictions. But we operate and have a large number of clients in a large number of jurisdictions that are not friendly. We have an office in Dubai, we have an office in Moscow, and we have a large number of clients out in the Middle East and in all sorts of other jurisdictions. And we can really act as a firm as agents for change. That might sound really big, but it's something that we genuinely, and Justin, as our CEO, genuinely believes in. Countries change their laws when they realize that they will lose out financially and that they will lose business if they don't up their game and step up to the mark, and start getting rid of some of these antiquated laws and discriminatory sides. So we work with clients in jurisdictions, we work with charities like Stonewall or Human Dignity Trust on pro bono matters, and it is lovely to be able to be in a firm that doesn't just put the sort of diversity stuff all over its website, but that actually has it running all the way through and is prepared to put its money where its mouth is a little bit in terms of some of those initiatives.
I will actually dig a little deeper on, so you mentioned, so of course, with offices in Moscow, offices in Dubai, just out of curiosity, what sort of situation is that, I suppose, for LGBT staff that maybe want to work in these offices or exist in these offices? Is that something the company intervenes on? Is it more of a, I don't know, sort of, where the firm stands on that, if you had any idea?
Yeah, so there are a couple of points. I mean, we operate our firm on an advocate and embassy basis. So there are some offices that we refer to as advocates, so like London, where we can go out widely. We can say this is exactly who we are to everyone. There are then firms in some of those more hostile jurisdictions that we refer to as embassies, and those are you as an LGBTQ plus person have to feel entirely safe within our office. You know, it has to be a completely safe space. Now, obviously, there are certain local laws and restrictions that any organisation has to abide by, and we work hard to lobby for those changes. But we also try and push them as far as we can. The fact that we have Justin as our CEO, who we have an internal sort of network group called Yammer. It's a bit like a sort of business Twitter, and he will post up video updates, especially during COVID. You know, from he's living in Hong Kong. He will post video updates where he talks freely about his husband KC, and the bike that's on the wall behind him is KC's bike and it's not his bike. There are ways to make people who are in those offices who are LGBTQ plus feel completely included within a global firm, regardless of what's going on outside of that building. One thing I was just very, very quickly, sorry, I know I'm rabbiting on, but one of the reasons that HSF is seen as a really positive training contract application provider is we do a lot of overseas secondments, both during your training contract and as an associate. And sometimes that can, I think, put people off if they are in an LGBTQ plus community, because they feel that, oh, I might just get shipped off to Saudi Arabia or something. And it's really important. We have a fantastic international mobility team who work really, really closely with HR and grad HR to make sure that no one is being sent anywhere where they don't feel comfortable, and actually that if people do want to go somewhere, they're given all the resources and information that they need.
Fantastic. I said to look a little bit sort of further at the LGBT network. I mean, you mentioned yourself, you qualified at another firm, so you have a bit of experience with sort of how different firms work. And I just wondered, how important to you do you think it is that a firm that you work for has an LGBT network, and sort of, how beneficial do you find having that LGBT network there?
I find it incredibly rewarding, both personally and professionally. It genuinely makes a huge difference, particularly in your first job or your second job, or in, frankly, any organisation where you're a little bit more junior, to make sure that there are open visible signs of sort of acceptance and inclusion. I remember when I was, first coming out, and I wasn't out in my first job because I didn't see those signs out there. A job in the art market rather than a law firm. It being able to see, really positive role models higher up the chain makes an enormous difference. You do your job better when you're not sat there thinking, oh, which pronoun did I use when I was talking about my weekend? Did I say my boyfriend? Oh no. And as lawyers, we are all we do is we are creative. We kind of rely on creative thinking and on being individuals and free to think. And if you're constantly holding something back, that impacts your performance. On a professional side, having a network internally makes an enormous difference, particularly when you're new, because it's a way of building that network within the firm. It's a way of getting yourself known amongst, senior people within the firm, which is a great way if you're eager and ambitious to progress your career. It's a fantastic way of sort of cutting through, what otherwise might be, strict sort of department silos, and just saying, we are one firm. No, I think it's fantastic.
Just to sort of, again, and maybe sort of pry a little further. So it just said, you mentioned this idea of being able to bring your whole self to work, not having to worry about pronouns. A lot of sort of work that people sort of, think around sort of lawyers is this sort of client-facing role where you've got to try and bring sort of work into the firm, where you've got to maintain firm relationships with clients. Do you feel as though there are many barriers to being sort of your full self with clients necessarily, or is it, where you're able to be out at work, you're able to be out with clients as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question, particularly where you're working internationally. I think certainly a lot of the clients that we have are, they work in professional services. They tend to be fairly, we're quite lucky in that our clients tend to be fairly well-off, educated, liberal people who work in urban environments who are generally more accepting. It is, on a personal level, something that I try and get ahead of a lot of the time. I will often jump the gun, and particularly if you start engaging with a client at a social event, you will, before anyone asks you, or before you get to that awkward moment of, oh, and I see that you've got a wedding ring, what did you and your wife do? I will always take the initiative and be like, oh, well, me and my husband did this or something. We have quite a few out gay partners, actually LGBT and Q plus partners, both in London and more widely. I work quite closely with some of them, and it's wonderful to be able to see them engaging with clients on a, they don't adapt themselves, they don't hide who they are, depending on the client, which is wonderful.
Fantastic. We're now going to look a little bit more at the graduate recruitment, if that's all right. I just wondered, Rebecca, if you could just quickly run us through, I said you touched on it slightly, the graduate recruitment process, sort of from the student perspective, sort of how they can come to get involved at Herbert Smith.
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of the opportunities we have, like I mentioned, we recruit for our trainee solicitors, and so we solely recruit from our vacation schemes. And as I kind of mentioned before, I do really think that, a vacation scheme is a great way for you to get to know us as a firm and really decide if we're the firm that you want to train at and, begin your career at. And that's the main motivating reason why we recruit from our vacation schemes, because we need to know that you can do the job and do our kind of due diligence whilst you're with us for those 2 or 3 weeks, but equally you need to make sure that you can see yourself with us. Do you feel like you can be yourself? Are you engaged in the work? All those kind of things. I guess in terms of the application process, it'll start with an online application form, which I'm sure everyone isn't too surprised at. The online form asks you more about your education, personal details, and then there's 2 questions that we ask along the lines of, what can you bring to the role? Why are you motivated to work at Herbert Smith Freehills, type of thing. And then if you once you submit your online form, we then send you the online test to do. The test isn't the usual Watson Glaser, which I think most other firms kind of use. It's a unique test to Herbert Smith Freehills. There's a practice one on our graduate recruitment website, so please don't let that put you off. You can do the practice test as many times as you want. We do not see the results, and I would very much encourage you to kind of have a go. Same with whatever firm that you're applying for. There's loads of free tests out there, so definitely do that.
Out of curiosity there, sorry, just quickly, am I correct? So you mentioned it's not the Herbert, it's not the Watson Glaser test, rather, which I think there will certainly be some people in the audience slightly relieved at that. I know myself, the panic of the Watson Glaser test.
Yeah.
But is it particularly similar in sort of how it runs, or is it just a completely brand new, sort of very different sort of approach to testing? So what is that difference?
So it's a blended test, so it does all the situational judgment, psychometric, all of that, but it's just rolled into one. And essentially, we did a huge project, probably about 3 years ago now, where we looked at what skills successful trainees and associates possess at the firm, and we're trying to look at that potential within our applicants when they're doing those online tests. So it's just rolled into one. It takes about 30 minutes. We don't time you at all, but that's roughly how long it takes. But yeah, I've heard that the Watson Glaser isn't too well thought of amongst more students.
Very, very fun.
Yeah. And then if you pass the online test, that's when we'll review your form. So that's when the graduate recruitment team come into force and we review your form. If we like what we see and we see, your responses are good, we'll invite you to an assessment centre. Assessment centre, it comprises of a competency interview, a case study interview, and a scenario-based interview with all a mixture of partners and senior associates at the firm. As well as lunch and some social activities. So again, you can kind of get a feel for the firm whilst you're there. And if you, do well at the assessment centre, we'll invite you onto a vacation scheme. And then at the end of the vacation scheme, we'll interview you one last time for a training contract position, and then we'll make an offer based on that.
Fantastic. And out of curiosity, so is it that, so am I correct that everyone within the vacation scheme will be put forward for that interview? So what sort of a numbers are? Is it, say, for example, you've got maybe 80 vacation scheme students and maybe, you know, however many places for a training contract? What is that sort of?
Yeah, so we don't kind of limit how many students we have on a VAC scheme, but roughly we have between 20 to 30 students on a VAC scheme. Last year we had about 100 VAC scheme students, and we recruit 60 trainees a year. So you've got a decent chance of getting a training contract off the back of it.
Fantastic, fantastic. And so to dive a little deeper into those applications, we've talked about sort of the tests and how people can sit those online. But in terms of the actual applications, what is the firm looking for in its applicants? What sort of, so you mentioned sort of about the skills, what kind of skills and potential for skills is the firm looking for?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just important to kind of highlight here that we're not looking for applicants to have legal work experience. I know some firms will rule you out if you don't have any legal work experience, but that's absolutely not the case for us. Roughly, we're looking for you to have a consistent 2-1 at university and be on track for that if you haven't already graduated. We're not interested in your A-levels either, so you know, it's probably a given that if you've got into university, you've got okay A-levels. You know, there's nothing to suggest that your A-levels performance at A-level will make you a good or a bad lawyer. So we're very much kind of interested in the 2-1 at university degree. I guess in terms of skill sets, it's really important, you know, to think about what skills are needed to be a successful trainee. So communication, teamwork, empathy, confidence, being able to kind of multitask, you know, all of those skills. I mean, they're not just limited to, you know, being a successful trainee or lawyer. They can be kind of transferred across all industries. The main thing here is that we're looking for you to demonstrate those skills. So, you know, there's no kind of point in saying, you know, I'm really confident and I'm really good working in a team. We need you to be able to demonstrate that with examples and experience. So, you know, if you're thinking, I'm not very good at teamwork, or I don't think I could demonstrate that, you know, now is the time to think, if you're still at university or you're in the working world, what opportunities can you, you know, give yourself that you can build on those skill sets, so that when you come to university, you can give examples of where you've demonstrated those skills. So I think that's the main thing, really. But, you know, equally, you know, you need to be confident and comfortable with the work that we do as a law firm. So being able to kind of talk about your motivations for applying to us is really important. So most students are quite confident in talking about why law and, you know, why commercial law, corporate law, but actually tailoring that to Herbert Smith Freehills or the firm that you're applying for is where students fall down, and that's at application form stage and at interview stage. You know, you need to be able to give examples of any sort of deals or cases that we've worked on that you found particularly interesting, and, you know, being able to kind of articulate what about it was interesting, what's your understanding about that, because, you know, the people that are interviewing you might have worked on it or will surely have heard of it, and be able to actually open a bit of a dialogue about that and have a conversation about it. And it's that intellectual curiosity, really, that we're looking for, because that means, you know, you're motivated and you're interested in kind of a career at Herbert Smith Freehills.
Fantastic. And sort of to go, you touched on it slightly at the end there, but sort of if you had any tips or advice for people going into those interviews, sort of what would it be on how, you know, they can make the best sort of case for themselves in them?
Yeah, I mean, interviews are really daunting, and especially if they do kind of go virtual, I know that's even harder to kind of get yourself across on a screen. But I guess my top tips for preparing for any interview is, first of all, remember that it's a two-way process. So although you're hopefully really motivated for applying to that job, and, you know, you've put a lot of effort into preparing, you know, the aim of the interview is for them to understand if you're the right person for that job. But equally, you know, the flip side of that, it's a two-way process. You need to work out after that interview, after that assessment centre, you know, do I want to work here? Did I have a positive experience? Did the conversations that I have kind of affirm what I was feeling? So prepare, obviously, especially in a law firm. Like, you know, you might apply in September, but actually you might not get through to an interview until December or January, for example. So you might forget what's on your form. So familiarise yourself with what you've put. You know, anything that's on your form that you've included in terms of answering the questions or your work experience history, it's all fair game for them to ask you about. So familiarise yourself with it, and make sure you're confident and comfortable talking about those experiences. I think I kind of mentioned it just earlier, but be, you know, confident and comfortable talking about the firm and being motivated, you know, showing your motivation for Herbert Smith Freehills in particular is really important. Being able to kind of talk about why you want to work in law at, you know, Herbert Smith Freehills is really what's going to set you apart, and doing that through kind of demonstrating what you know about us is an easy way to do that. Questions. Have questions for your interviewer. You might not necessarily know who will be interviewing you specifically, and we don't give that information out because it could literally change the morning of your interview, and so we wouldn't want you to kind of prepare for that and be disappointed that that person hasn't attended. So you will know, for example, that it's a partner for your case study and a partner for your scenario-based interview. So you can tailor your questions for that. And this kind of goes back to it being a two-way process. So what questions can you ask your interviewer that can give you an insight into life at the firm that you can't get from the website, that you can't get from the brochure? So, you know, thinking about what questions, you know, what's been your career highlight? And if the answer that they give you sounds really boring or really tedious, then perhaps we're not the firm for you. Or, you know, if it really sounds exciting and you want to be able to say that same thing in 5 years' time, then, you know, hopefully you'll go away thinking, you know, that's the place I want to start my career. So having a bank of, you know, I would say 6 to 7 questions up your sleeve for an interview, because inevitably some of them will be answered throughout, is always a really good tip.
Yeah, sort of that preparation and coming into it. Fantastic. Just before we go over to our questions for our Q&A session, and I would say to anyone listening, you know, I see we've got quite a few questions already, but if there is anything we haven't sort of gone over, please feel free to send them in. I have sort of one last question to both of you. Sort of what about any sort of takeaway advice that you would have for graduates that want sort of a career similar to yours? What sort of advice you'd have? I don't know, Steve, if you had anything you wanted to start with. Put you on the spot, Steve.
Yeah, I think I come at this from, I was looking to change sort of career. I applied to some training contracts. I didn't get anywhere. I got rejected from everywhere the first time round. I did the GDL funding myself. Got rejected a load more times, but one firm said yes. So the only thing, the key message I would have is there are literally thousands and thousands of people applying for training contracts every single year. The fact that you don't get an interview at a firm that you think is amazing or doing a particular type of law that you think is wonderful should never dishearten you, should never put you off. You will get through, and sometimes it's just a question of, you know, the fates aligning and things just working out. But, you know, it is difficult. Do not take rejection personally at all, is what I would say. Look at me, I ended up all right.
Done very well for yourself. If you had anything you wanted to add to that.
The only thing I would add is pursue something that you are genuinely interested in, because especially with law, you know, you're in it for the long haul, and don't do it, or don't apply to a big firm or you know, get swept away with what your peers are doing. You know, do your research, be confident that it is something that you are genuinely interested in, rather than, well, my friend's doing it, so perhaps that's the right thing or the cool thing or the most prestigious thing to do. You know, make sure it's the right decision for you, and use your networks. Or, you know, for example, this Q&A today, you know, you've got 2 more people, me and Steve, to add to your network, and use them to kind of, you know, bounce ideas off it, or, you know, if you want to talk through things in more detail about the actual career itself, to kind of do your due diligence before you kind of jump in, then, you know, that's kind of my advice.
Fantastic. I'm now going to take us to some of our questions in the audience. So to the first question I have is for you, Rebecca. It asks if you have any tips for the application tests. I know we talked about it a little bit, but if there were any other tips you could.
Yeah, so definitely do practice tests. I know they're awful things to do, and I do not envy you at all, but the more it's with anything, practice does make perfect. Just make sure you're in a quiet room, make sure you have no distractions, make sure you've given yourself plenty of time, you've tested your internet connection, all of, you know, the logistical side of things, and just practice first. Get used to being in a timed condition, get used to being kind of under that kind of pressure before you actually do the real thing, because I think, you know, personally panic would set in and, you know, if I hadn't done a practice test. So definitely do some practices.
Fantastic. And a question for Steve. How do you think diversity and inclusion initiatives help in Herbert Smith Freehills' legal work at all? I don't know if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, so there are some of the things that I've talked about in being able to be yourself, and that helps you be the best lawyer that you can be. There are some real practical things that help, not just in terms of, say, networking with clients can sometimes feel really, really daunting. You know, oh, we've got to go and talk to this big bank. I don't know what I'm going to say. But actually, if you're networking about and talking to them about, you know, LGBT plus issues, that everyone's reading the same stuff, it's a much better way to practice your networking skills. From a real legal work perspective, some of the pro bono stuff that we have done with either on our own bat or with charities like Human Dignity Trust give, you know, quite junior people the ability to take, you know, court applications all the way to the Privy Council in relation to, you know, appealing sentences for people, you know, in Belize or you know, various other countries. So there's, you know, real practical experience that you can learn, which is fantastic.
Excellent. And another one for Rebecca that asks, is it true that students can now only reapply if they fail at any application stage 2 years later instead of the next application cycle? Bit of a...
Ooh, the myths and the rumours that go.
Yeah, so we'll address it head on. We'll take the myth busting route.
Yeah, exactly. So no. So I think the confusion has come in is if you apply and get through to an assessment centre and you do not pass the assessment centre, there is a 2-year window that you need to go through to reapply. And that's purely because, you know, it's a lot of time and investment in terms of partner resource to go through the, you know, to assess you at assessment centre. And we think it's a really fair assessment. So we would expect that, you know, in order to kind of get through next time, it would take 2 years kind of for you to do that. If you fail the online test, then you need to wait until the next recruitment cycle to reapply. If you pass a test, but your application form doesn't meet the mark, you can apply again in the same recruitment cycle.
Fantastic. Excellent. Thanks for myth busting here on Student Bites. Fantastic. Another one for you, Steve. Do you get to travel, or are there opportunities to move to different locations? Or what does that look like at Herbert Smith?
Yeah, absolutely. There are always opportunities to apply during your training contract. You can apply to do one of your 6-month seats at one of our overseas offices. So, you know, I remember going and visiting friends out in, you know, Tokyo or Singapore who are doing their 6-month seats there. When you're an associate, you can apply to do overseas secondments similarly in our offices, but also with clients, both within the UK and overseas, which can be a really, really fantastic opportunity. I was on a call yesterday with someone who's on a secondment to an associate secondment to a firm in LA, and is just living his absolute best life.
Can't really beat it, can you? It's particularly everything going on. Fantastic. Another one for you, Rebecca. So you mentioned about reading deals that Herbert Smith have done and describe how that interests you. Where is the best place to read up on the work Herbert Smith do? There are normally 1 or 2 cases on the website.
Yes, so the website is a good idea as a starting point, I guess, to give you a flavour of the work we do. So perhaps that could be the deciding factor of whether you're interested in us. That's not overly impressive on an application form or an interview to bring those cases up because we've written that material, and we would expect you to demonstrate some wider reading and, you know, that shows a motivation for Herbert Smith Freehills. So it's about reading the press, Financial Times, not necessarily back to front, but I know there's a few, I think there's an app called Finimize or something like that, where it kind of gives you a bite-sized chunk of kind of legal press. So it's really important to kind of keep up to date that way. And if you have a genuine interest in the legal industry, you know, you should be reading these kind of things anyway, and kind of, you know, highlighting or trying to kind of pick out the Herbert Smith Freehills deals within that. You know, it is definitely, you know, a way forward with that. But absolutely start with the website, look at what we've kind of provided there as, you know, a taste of what we do, and to see if you find that interesting. But if it's kind of looking at an application form or at interview stage, we would expect you to kind of demonstrate wider reading or listening or watching.
Excellent. And I guess a question for both of you. I don't know if either of you can answer this. But it asks, does HSF's medical insurance include transgender related surgeries or other treatments? That's definitely yes. So we've got this answer from Steve. You hear all these fantastic stories about city law firms, these amazing packages. Always good to check.
Yeah. No, I should say, I think we were probably 3 years ago now. I think we were the first firm to introduce it. We still want to make it better. At the moment, it is based on a private medical insurance product that's, you know, pretty much it's a one size fits all. There aren't yet that many products out there on the market that allow more flexible arrangements. We are trying to find one. We are trying to make ourselves better. There was also the point I talked about earlier. You know, we want to make our own internal guidelines better so that we're able to, you know, help people financially if they need it. So there's always stuff that we can do better.
Fantastic. Another one for you, Rebecca, this one about COVID-19. Well, it's two questions rolled into one about, will the application process be affected in terms of COVID-19, and has COVID-19 impacted the trainee intake this year? And so what's that looking like for the future? I don't know if you know at all. I know it's probably a very up in the air thing.
Yeah, so in terms of how it's affected us so far, we moved our spring and summer vacation schemes this year online. So we're doing training contract interviews at the end of this month for those that haven't been able to come on a spring or summer vacation scheme. And then those that have been offered a training contract off the back of those interviews will do a 4-day virtual internship with us. We're very, very hopeful and optimistic that come September, October time, when our applications open, we will be running assessment centres as usual in person in the office. So we don't have plans to make them virtual just yet. Obviously, that's, you know, taking into account government guidelines and safety measures. So if we need to move them online, then we will.
Excellent, fantastic. I think we're only a few minutes left now, so I'm going to sort of pause with the questions there. I appreciate we've had so many questions come through, and I would say to anyone, if we haven't had a chance to come around to your question, I'm sure Rebecca and Steve will be more than happy to pick those up after the webinar. So we already mentioned about reaching out to you via LinkedIn. I'm sure we can pass your emails on if fantastic in our post pack that will be coming to you. So if you have any questions from there, please, you know, do not hesitate to bring them up. But that sort of brings us to the end of Student Bites for this week. I would like to say a big thank you to Rebecca and Steve for joining us from Herbert Smith Freehills. We are back next Tuesday, as always, 16th of June, 2 p.m, same place, same time, with law firm Lewis Silkin. So thank you very much for everyone for coming along. If you don't know what My G Work is, that's perfectly all right. We're an LGBT business platform that aims to bring and connect LGBT professionals, you know, LGBT graduates, allies, etc., with each other in the first instance, with inclusive jobs and inclusive employers like Herbert Smith Freehills, with mentors, with LGBT-friendly news, events, job postings, etc. And you can again sign up for free there and find out more about the amazing work we're doing. So thank you very much, Rebecca. Thank you, Steve. It's been lovely to talk to you. Thank you, everyone, for turning out, and we'll see you all next week. See you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.